In Chapter 8, we're looking at stratification, and one of the ways that societies are stratified is by class. And in the United States, as we look at class, we also have to look at income, and as we look at income in the United States, we also must address income inequality. So we look at class in America. Most Americans claim they are middle class because they know there are some people who make more money than they do and some people who make less. We don't always talk about class in America, but we definitely are concerned with income and money, as well as other status indicators, such as the type of car we drive, the church we go to, the schools we attend. We don't necessarily refer to those in terms of class, but we have definitely perhaps code words. So, for example, my child goes to a good school, or that family goes to a good church. When we look at class in America, one of the reasons we don't talk about it has to do with our value system, that individuals should be able to be successful as long as they work hard. So Americans are supposed to be able to achieve success solely by hard work. However, social mobility, which is the ability to move from class to class, generally we think of it as making more money than your parents, so upward mobility rather than downward mobility, is actually much lower in the United States than in other Western countries. The upward social mobility is less. In a democracy like America, everyone is supposed to have an equal chance, but the data doesn't support this. So for example, if we look at gender and race, women make less money than white men for the same job. They make 78 cents for the dollar that a white man does. And if we look at African American women, then they make 62 cents on the dollar that white men do. And African American men, even with a college degree, will make less money than white men for the same job. So if we look at social mobility comparison of different countries, here we have intergenerational earning elasticity. So what this is basically the correlation between the earnings of the fathers and the sons. So it is a little bit sexist because we're not considering women, but it gives us a fair idea of how easy it is to move into a different class. So here, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Canada, Australia, these are the countries that where we see more ease of upward social mobility. And here, the United Kingdom, Italy, the United States, and Switzerland, we see less intergenerational upward mobility. So it's harder to move to a different social class. So in the United States, the class that you're born into does definitely have a strong impact on what class you'll end up in as an adult. So there are various ways that class can be defined and measured, and income is usually included. And income disparity in the United States is measurable from income tax returns and other ways that we can measure how much money people have, and it has been increasing for almost 40 years. So let's look at defining class. This is somewhat controversial, and different textbooks have different ways of defining class. As the economy in the past 35 to 40 years has been drastically changing in the United States, so has our definition of class. So typically, there are 4 to 6 classes that are taught. The upper class in your textbooks has more than $180,000 per year in income. That's about 5% of the American population. Upper middle class, $100,000 to $180,000. That's 15% of the population. And this is income. Lower middle class, $38,000 to $100,000. That's about 40%. Working class, $20,000 to $38,000, 20%. And those that make less than that, which is the underclass. And that would include workers who are working for minimum wage or part-time. You work minimum wage 40 hours per week, 50 weeks per year, your income is going to be $14,500. Now, I do want to take issue with some of the statements that are in your textbook, and I find these statements to be found in most introductory sociology books, that the working class has enough money to put food on the table and maybe even save for a college education. And I would take issue with that. In recent years, if you're making $20,000 and if you have a family, you are most likely not going to be able to save for a vacation. In fact, you will be living paycheck to paycheck. In fact, a recent study has shown that for a single person to live a very modest lifestyle requires a salary of $35,000. So if you have a family and you're making this income, you are really, really struggling to make ends meet. So here, this is not from your textbook, but this is a proposed new American class structure as our economy has changed. We have the super class, the owners and the employers, which would be the upper 5%. And then the credentialed class managers and professionals such as lawyers and doctors and university professors, not community college professors. So this is going to be the upper 20%. And then the new working class is going to be the 80%. At the top of that, we have the comfort class, those who are making the highest salaries, such as nurses, and then the contingent class, wage earners and self-employed. So this would include community college professors, police officers, firefighters, teachers, and then the excluded class, those who are working minimum wage jobs or are unable to sustain employment at all. So this shows that the majority of the people in the United States really have an instability in their employment status, because even the self-employed at this level are going to be vulnerable to changes in the economy. Now, it is important to distinguish between income versus wealth, and how economists define this is really still a matter of some controversy. So we're just going to look at income as money from wages, salaries, or earned from investments. And wealth is the assets that someone owns, such as money in a savings account, property such as real estate, jewelry, art, boats, cars, stocks and bonds. And one thing I want to mention is wealth cannot be accumulated if one's income is depleted for living expenses. So if one has a large income, it's much easier to accumulate wealth, whereas if you have a very low income and barely making ends meet, it's going to be impossible to accumulate wealth. So let's take a look now at income inequality. And this is a chart that goes from 1917 to 2007, and it is the top 10% of American, their income share. So by share, it means the percentage of, if we look at all the income that is made by all Americans, what percentage is made by the top percent. And here it distinguishes between including capital gains and excluding capital gains. And in capital gains is a profit that you make from selling property or selling some kind of investment. So if we look at including capital gains, which I think is more realistic because it includes money that is obtained, right before the Great Depression, we see that the top 10% had almost 50% of the income. And we see that right before the recession in 2008. Now, this doesn't go into 2015, but if we were to look at that, we don't see the decline that we see after, we definitely see that it is increasing. This income of the top 10% increases. It is not going down. Now, if we further take out the top 1%, we see that the top 1% is almost 25% of the pre-tax income share right before the Great Depression, as well as right before the Great Recession. And this value continues to be up here in 2013, 2014, for the years that we have data for. And this income disparity was not always the case. If we look at the post-World War II up to the mid-1970s, the top 10%, the top 1%, made about 10% of the income share. And then in the 1980s and beyond, we see a greater increase, much more similar to what happened before the Great Depression. So one of the factors, there are many, many factors that contribute to this, but one of the factors we can look at is the extreme inequality that is demonstrated by CEO compensation versus the workers that they manage. So in 1965, a CEO made about 20 times that of its workers. In 2013, a CEO made almost 300 times that of their workers. And this is compensation. So this includes not only income, but stock options and any bonuses, which are pretty substantial for highly paid CEOs, as well as the company car and health benefits. Any sort of compensation that that CEO might obtain is included in this value here. Also, let's take a look at the wages of workers. If we look at 1948 to 1973, so we look at this, this time frame here, we look from the beginning to the end, the change in productivity was almost 100%, and the change in hourly earnings matched that pretty consistently. We look at 1973 to 2001, we see a continued increase in productivity, and yet the hourly earnings does not match that. And when we look at real hourly earnings, that is corrected for inflation. We can also look at real growth, real income growth. So again, that real income is the income the salary or the wages that someone gets, and that real means it's been corrected for inflation. If we look between 1947 and 1973, the lowest fifth had the greatest increase in their income. So if we look at perhaps in 1947 a salary of $10,000, by 1973, if there was an increase of 100%, that salary would be $20,000. The second fifth saw an increase, as did the third and the fourth, to about the same extent. The highest fifth and the top fifth did not see the same increase, but again, we're talking about much larger amounts of money. So we look at the highest fifth. If they saw an 80% increase in their salary or their income from 1947 to 1973, if in 1947 that was $1 million, in 1973 that would be $1,800,000. So we're talking about much larger amounts of money. Now, when we look at 1979 to 2009, we see that the lowest fifth actually decreased in their income. The second fifth barely increased. The third fifth a little around 10%. The fourth fifth about 20%. And the highest fifth saw the greatest increase. And if we take out the top 5%, we see that increase is even higher. And if we take out the 1%, we see the 1%, their income in 1979 to 2007 increased by about 265%. So that's a huge increase. Now let me just point out what these are, the lowest quintile, second quintile. What economists tend to do is they tend to look at the income of people from 0 degrees to the maximum income, and then they equally divide it into fifths. So the lowest quintile will be the lowest 20% income. The second would be the next 20%. Middle would be the next 20%. So these quintiles mean 20% divisions if we look from 0 to the highest income that is earned, and we just divide it evenly among those income ranges. So why is income inequality important? Well, first, it's important because the greater the income inequality, the greater the social problems a society faces. And one of the most interesting things about it is it is not really the amount of money, but the relative comparison. So the United States is one of the richest countries in the world, and if we look at the median income of Americans, it's about $50,000 per year, which is so much higher than the majority of the world. However, our income inequality, the difference between the lowest earners and the highest earners, is also one of the highest in the world. And the amount of social problems that we see can be correlated to the amount of inequality, income inequality. So it's important to know that it's not just the amount of money that is different, but it is the relative comparison. And it's also important to know that this income inequality did not always exist. There was a time when people saw an increase in their income, and in the past 35 years, we have not seen that for the majority of Americans.